Next on our top 10 countdown of all Destiny 2 raid bosses, Argos, our very first raid layer boss that we ever got. This came out during the Curse of Osiris, which, as we all know, was the worst fucking DLC ever created. Oh man, that shit was so bad, even the YouTube owner stopped fucking himself to say how bad that shit was. Overall, I like the Argos fight, but when you get into the points of what actually consummates the rating system, you're going to notice that Argos doesn't really score very high, and part of the low rating is actually going to be penalized for the Curse of Osiris, which we're going to get to at the very end. For those that haven't seen the prior two videos, I have 10 categories in which I'm rating all the raid bosses. Each one is getting a score, and at the end, we're totaling up the score, and we're seeing which raid boss is actually going to come out on top. Now, one final thing to note before I get into the countdown is whether or not I use the prestige version of Argos versus the normal version. For this, we're going to do the normal version. I'm going to talk about Callus when I get to his video, but essentially, when it comes to Argos and even Valkaur, the big difference between the prestige versus the normal was there wasn't a main mechanic difference. In almost all the prior raids, whether it was Leviathan or the Destiny 1 raids, every boss had something just a little bit mechanically different from normal to prestige mode. Think of Vosik. Vosik had a number of televisions that you had to shoot. However, when you went to the prestige version, there were only 2. Axis took a number more orbs to break open his damage phase compared to when it was on normal. Crota had that extra invincible motherfucker on the floor where people were hiding out in the tunnel. You couldn't do the tunnel strategy on prestige. You could do it on normal, but you couldn't do it on prestige because that guy would fuck your day up. And then obviously Callus had some differences where you had to do who was going into the Shadow Realm versus who was staying outside in the room. There are differences. When it comes to Argos and Valkaur, there were no mechanical differences. The main thing that they did was they came out with this curated role every week where you're supposed to use a new gun. Whether it was an auto rifle, sniper rifle, rocket launcher, whatever it was, they told you exactly what you had to use, and it was up to you to find that particular weapon. Then they would come up with a couple of modifiers that were specially curated. It really wasn't a mechanical difference. So for that reason, I can't justify using a prestige version of Argos and Valkaur compared to the way Callus is going to operate. So this version of the boss, as well as Valkaur, are only going to use the normal version. That being said, let's get into the list. Communication, I actually gave this a 1, and here's why. When I think of communication during a raid, I think of it during the actual fight. How much do teammates need to talk during the fight to communicate different aspects of what's going on? With Argos, there's almost no communication needed. Essentially, you just have to say, I'm running on this plate, I'm defending on this plate, and that's it. That's the entire fight. For the most part, the only other time that you're going to communicate is when you have to call out what the damage plate is and what 3 orbs we're going to use to unlock the Argos damage phase. But other than that, you really don't talk during this fight, so I can't give it a high score. I had to give it a 1. Unique elements. Aside from having 3 damage platforms, most all the other raid bosses that we've ever faced, whether it was Destiny 1 or Callus during Leviathan, was basically you stayed in the same spot. You were in the same arena. You really didn't move from one place to another all that much. Yeah, you could stand in different places, but Argos literally had 3 different platforms. That's about the only thing unique about this fight. Otherwise, unlocking it, knowing the elements, a lot of that came from the Axis fight during the Wrath of the Machine raid. You had to know your Arc, your Void, your Solar. So as long as you knew Arc, Void, and Solar, you're good. Otherwise, there really wasn't anything unique with the Argos fight. Damage unlock. This one I gave a 2. Realistically, not that difficult. All you had to do was know 2 Solar, 1 Void, 3 Arc, 1 of each. That's all it really took. And your runners took care of the rest. They went to the plate that they were responsible for. Your defenders, if they had the time, they went to the plate where you did the damage and you brought another cranium over there. But the damage to unlock this was very simple. The hardest part about this was really staying alive, but figuring it out, not that difficult. Variety of strategy, and this is the topic that I want to dissect. As I mentioned in the prior 2 videos, with 10 raid bosses and 10 criteria, I wanted to get into detail into each one of these criteria, at least 1 per video. So for this video, we're talking about the variety of strategy when it comes to Argos. When I talk about the variety of strategy, I want to think about the differences that you can use when it comes to the damage phase. Think of sniping versus shotgun range. Think of whether you use your supers or whether you have to use your weapons. Primary ammo versus secondary ammo type arguments. For the most part, Argos does not have a variety of strategy. Yes, teams have gotten right up to him and shotgunned his ass and beaten the fuck out of him up close. Reality is, not a lot of teams were going to do that back when the raid released. Now that we have all kinds of weapons such as the Well of Radiance, the Lord of Wolves, all these different items that came out after Argos was released has made that fight much easier. But when I look at the variety of strategy, I want to know that you have the ability to choose how you want to beat a boss. Maybe you want to use your Whisper of the Worm. Maybe you want to get up close in their asshole and use your supers or your shotguns or something that does a lot of up-close damage to a boss. With Argos, the distance that the platforms had and the amount of damage that you could do from a distance with those suicide motherfuckers that attacked you when they came out from a distance, you basically had to snipe him. You basically had to kill him with rockets. Golden guns, of course, worked from a distance, but this really wasn't a boss that you could get up close to. Yes, again, people use their shotguns to get up right into his face, but that wasn't the norm. The norm was going to be a distance fight. So for this fight, there really wasn't a lot of strategy and variety. Bring your sins of the past, bring your best sniper rifles, and then obviously at the end, have a Warlock pop his class ability, because remember, we didn't have the well back then. Have your Titan pop your barricade, and that's how you beat Argos. Direct threat level the boss, I gave this a 2. Aside from his cannon, he really didn't do much directly to you. And here's the thing, you could shoot the cannon when he was still locked in his cube before you even started the encounter. However, obviously, once you started the encounter, if you didn't get to the cannons, when you got to the first wipe phase, you could blow out his cannons, and after that, he really wasn't a direct threat. The majority of the threat came from the ads that were on each of the platforms. But essentially, Argos himself, those cannons, that was really it. Mobility of this fight. Overall, I gave this an average score of 3. And a big reason for that is a lot of the mobility came from the damage phase. You have to move around a lot just to make sure that you could get to the correct platform. And even when you were doing the damage, you did need to move around just a little bit, whether you had to avoid the shot that he was firing at you, that prison that he fired at people, whether it was to avoid some of the suicide bombers, whether you had a Minotaur up your ass, you had to do a little bit of moving on the platform. Not a lot, but a lot of the mobility came with obviously going to get the craniums, going to the correct plate, and bringing them back to the main damage phase. Recovery. If you fuck up, can you recover on this fight? Absolutely. This one I actually gave a 5 because this is one of those games. Because this is one of those encounters where hero moments really come into effect. Essentially, if you did fuck up a damage phase and you did manage to screw something up, you still had 2 more chances to kill his ass. And you could easily recover even if you fucked up. Essentially, if someone messed up the whole damage phase, you didn't do it right, you unlocked it, you messed up the unlock, you could still go prevent his wipe mechanic, go right back to the platforms, reset the process, do it all over again, and still beat him. Teammates needed to unlock the damage phase. Now, I gave this a 4, and here's why. You could use 3 people to unlock the damage phase. There's no question about that. Hell, you could even use 2. There are people who have soloed this raid and have 2-man this raid. But the reality is, again, we're going by a normal team. I would say you need 3 to do the craniums and at least 1 person to do ad control on the damage platform. The damage platform is obviously going to get swarmed with ads. And if people are just coming over with their craniums and they have to shoot down the orbs to unlock Argos, you're going to get absolutely bombarded by Minotaurs and Harpies. You need at least 1 person on that platform to take care of that. So that's why I chose 4 teammates were needed to unlock this particular damage phase. Difficulty at launch. I gave this a 2. Didn't matter if you had the Whisper of the Worm. It didn't matter if people were using Cold Heart. For the majority of people who played this game, this was not a difficult fight. We did not have to have a certain weapon in order to beat the Argos fight. We didn't have the Well of Radiance. We didn't have the Blade Barrage. We didn't have Sentinel Shield. And we didn't need any of that shit. Essentially, if you had a Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun, you were fine. If you had the Sins of the Past Rocket, you were fine. Titans had their barricades. So even the base stuff that we had in the game, it allowed us to do a lot of damage, so it was not a difficult fight at the launch. Rewards. This is a gigantic fucking 0. 0, motherfucker. You got nothing. Essentially, what you got was the helmet to a fucking piece of gear that nobody wanted to use. There was no reward for Argos. Nothing. Back when Curse of Osiris launched, and this was back when Destiny 2 initially launched, it was under Activision's idea that we need to generalize it for the whole population and dumb the shit down to casuals, they offered nothing. They didn't want people to gain a weapon that was overly powerful in the raid that the normal crowd could not get. So when they launched this DLC, it followed that logic. And the rewards were nothing. There was nothing you needed to do in order to get a reward for Argos. Now, the Prestige version eventually came out with the catalyst for, I forget if it was the Colony or the Telesto or the Sleeper. It was one or the other. I don't remember which one it was. But that was a Prestige version, and it wasn't just the Argos encounter. It was even the prior encounters where it would fall at any point during the Argos fight. However, Argos himself, on normal, absolutely nothing. So, when you add up all the total of this score, Argos, as you see on the screen, rates at a number 23. That brought it to number 8 on the list. So, that does it for this video. Next up, number 7. You guys will get to see who I rated on that one. So, as always, rate, comment, subscribe, and all that good shit, and I'll see you guys in the next video.